The blade trembled in Clara Whitmore's hand, its rusted edge pressed firm against the stranger's coat, just above his heart. Her knuckles were raw white with cold and fear. Wind howled through the busted seams of the wagon's canvas, flapping like the wings of something dead. Behind her, 6 children huddled in silence, wrapped in threadbare blankets and each other's breath. The baby hadn't cried in over a day. That silence was louder than the storm. "Take one more step," Clara rasped, "and I'll open your ribs right here." The man didn't move. Snow clung to the folds of his long coat, his shoulders hunched against the gale. His gray eyes, strangely gentle, never left hers. "I believe you," he said. That stopped her. Adults didn't say things like that. They said calm down or put the knife down like she was some foolish child playing war. But this man just stood there in the snow, nodding slowly, like she had a right to every ounce of the fury burning in her chest. "I seen what you did to Henderson's arm," he added, still bleeding back at his wagon. "Tried to take your blanket. Deserved worse." Clara blinked snowflakes off her lashes. No one had defended her since her mother died. No one had stood on her side. "Why are you here?" she demanded. The man didn't smile. "To get you out of this wagon before you freeze to death." "We're fine. You ain't." His voice was gravel over something softer. "The baby, she's still breathing." Clara's fingers tightened around the knife. "Don't you talk about her. I've seen this before." Lips turn blue. "Then folks think they're just sleeping. But they don't wake up." A groan came from behind her. "Clara?" It was Jonas, 12 years old and pale. "He's right. Rosie. She ain't warm anymore." Clara didn't dare look. Her breath came fast and hot in the frozen air. 5 days. 5 days she'd kept them alive, scavenged from wagons, found firewood, fought off men twice her size. She'd become their mother, their father, their protector. She couldn't crack now. Not when Rosie's breath might be the only thing keeping them together. "Who are you?" she asked. "Name's Silas Brennan. Got a ranch 3 miles north. Fire's still burning, food in the pantry. Beds enough for all of you." Clara narrowed her eyes. "Why would you help us?" He crouched slowly, kneeling in the snow like he was praying. "Because once I didn't," he said. "Found a girl near Sweetwater. Didn't help her in time. I still see her face every night. I ain't looking to carry 7 more." A gust tore through the wagon and Rosie let out a sound something between a gasp and a sigh. It was too faint. Clara's heart cracked open. Just a little. Just enough to feel the sharpness of fear again. Jonas came to her side. "We have to go." She stared at Silas. His beard was heavy with frost, his coat patched. Nothing about him screamed safe. But her knife hand was shaking now. She'd been holding too much for too long. "If you try anything," she whispered, "I'll take you with me." "Fair enough," he said, standing. "Now let's move." The children hesitated. Tommy, 10 years old and mean with grief, glared up at Silas. "I'm watching you," he said, knife peeking from his belt. "Try anything, I gut you like a fish." Clara grabbed Rosie, her arms burning. Maggie wouldn't let go of Alice's hand. Sam kept asking questions no one could answer. And still they moved out of the wagon into the white world. The wind slapped Clara hard across the cheek, stealing her breath. Rosie weighed nothing now, nothing but bones and breath. They moved in a slow line, Silas at the front, Clara in the middle, Jonas covering the rear. The snow was up to their knees in places. Silas offered to carry Rosie once. Clara snapped. "I said don't touch her. You can barely stand." "I got her." He raised both hands, backing off. All right. She remembered that. Filed it away. He knew when to shut up. That mattered. Tommy trudged next to Silas, keeping pace with the stranger, jaw clenched. "What happened to your folks?" Silas asked quietly. "Pa got drunk and walked off a cliff," Tommy muttered. "Ma got the fever, died a week later." "I'm sorry," Tommy shrugged. "Don't be. Pa hit her. Hit us too. I ain't sorry he's dead, just sorry he didn't fall sooner." Silas grunted like he understood. "You ever hit someone who didn't deserve it?" Tommy asked. "No. How do I know you ain't lying?" Silas stopped walking. The snow came down like sand through a broken hourglass. "You don't," he said. "You don't know nothing about me except what I do. So watch. Watch how I treat your sisters. Watch how I treat Clara and Jonas and that baby. And if I ever do something that reminds you of your pa use that knife." Tommy studied him, eyes hard. "Fine. I'll watch." "Good." Behind them, Maggie stumbled. Her grip on Alice was failing. The girl hadn't spoken in days, not since her mama stopped breathing. Clara turned just in time to see Alice squeeze Maggie's hand. It was enough. "We're okay," Maggie whispered. "We're still okay." Clara wanted to believe that. Sam was riding on Silas's shoulders, now too tired to walk. "Are we going to die?" he asked. "No." "How do you know I don't? But I ain't gonna let you." "But what if you can't stop it? I'll try with everything I've got." Sam thought for a long moment. "My pa said trying didn't matter. Only winning mattered. Your pa was wrong." "That's what Ma said too. Right before she died." Silas didn't answer. Ahead, a faint black shape emerged from the snow. A house. Wood walls, stone chimney, smoke. Clara's knees buckled. Silas caught her by the elbow, not forceful, not soft. "Just a little further," he said. Clara looked down at Rosie's face, blue-lipped eyes fluttering. "Please," she whispered, "not yet. Just hold on." The door opened. Heat spilled out like salvation. Silas turned. Inside, he said, "Quickly, before the cold follows you in." The warmth hit Clara like a slap, not a comfort. Her skin burned with the return of blood, and her legs buckled again as the door slammed shut behind them, shutting out the wind's scream. Inside was dim, just lamplight and the deep orange glow of the fireplace, but it felt like a different world entirely. Silas peeled off his coat, stomped snow from his boots, and moved quickly with a quiet urgency. He didn't ask permission. He grabbed blankets from a chest, fed more wood into the fire, set a pot on the stove to boil. Clara laid Rosie down near the hearth, her own hands trembling too much to untie the baby's frozen bonnet. Maggie knelt beside her, whispering nonsense lullabies through cracked lips. Jonas hovered nearby, trying not to show how scared he was. Tommy stood with his back to the wall, knife still in hand. Sam had slumped down on a rug, legs splayed, eyes wide with exhaustion. Alice sat cross-legged beside him, staring into the fire like it was the only thing that still made sense. "We need to warm them slow," Silas said, his voice low but firm. "Too quick'll shock their systems." Clara didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on Rosie's chest, willing it to rise again. "I'll get the salve for frostbite," Silas muttered, disappearing down the hall. "You think she's Jonas started?" "She's not," Clara snapped. Jonas bit his lip and nodded. A kettle began to whistle. Maggie rocked Rosie gently, cooing under her breath. "You did it," she whispered. "You got us here." Clara barely heard her. She felt something tighten in her throat, something dangerous. The kind of feeling that makes your hands shake after the danger's past. Not during, never during. She shoved it down. Silas returned with a jar and thick rags. "We'll start with her hands and feet. She's just a baby," Clara murmured. "She can't tell us if it hurts. She doesn't need to. You'll see it." He reached for Rosie's hand, then paused. "May I?" Clara looked up at him, then down at Rosie. "Yeah, go on." They worked in silence. The baby's fingers were stiff but not black. That was something. Her breath was shallow but still there. "She's fighting," Silas said quietly. "So we fight with her." Tommy's voice cut through. "What's the catch?" Silas looked over. "There ain't no such thing as free," Tommy said. "You didn't just bring us here for kindness, so what is it? You want labor, you want money, we ain't got either." Silas didn't flinch. "What I want," he said, "is for 7 kids not to die in a snowstorm on my land. That all? Is that not enough?" Tommy didn't answer, but he didn't lower the knife either. Clara's voice was hoarse. "He could have left us out there. Others did." Tommy's lip curled. "That doesn't mean he's a saint, just means he's got his own reasons." Silas stood wiping his hands. "Maybe I do. Maybe I'm trying to sleep better at night. Maybe I'm just trying to do one right thing. Doesn't matter. You're here now. Fire's real, food's cooking." Maggie sniffed. "Smells like beans. And ham," Silas added. Sam sat up. "What's ham?" Silas chuckled. "You'll find out soon enough." Clara sat back against the wall, her whole body aching. She should have felt safe, but her bones stayed tight like they remembered too many nights when safety was just a lie someone told before the hurt came. Rosie stirred. Just a twitch, but enough. She moved, Maggie said, eyes wide. Clara leaned in, Rosie. The baby's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. A low whimper came from her lips. "She's back," Jonas whispered. "Clara. She's really back." Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She didn't cry, but her hands covered her face, and she sat like that for a long minute, breathing like she'd run 100 miles. Silas moved around the room, setting bowls, pouring water, cutting slices of cornbread. Clara noticed he had a limp, not pronounced, but there in his left leg. He never mentioned it. "I'll make up some beds in the other room," he said. "It ain't much. Old bunks from when my brothers used to stay. But they'll hold." "How many brothers?" Jonas asked. 2, dead now." Silas didn't offer more, and no one asked. As the children ate, Clara's eyes kept drifting to Silas. The way he moved, the way he said little but meant much. He reminded her of something, not someone but a feeling. Like the sound of a gate creaking open after years rusted shut. "Why'd you really take us in?" she asked quietly. Silas sat down across from her, a steaming mug in his hands. "I told you. I didn't help someone once. Lost her because of it. Your daughter." His jaw clenched. "A neighbor girl, 10 years old. Snow like this. I passed her wagon, figured someone else would come along." She froze. "Sheriff found her 3 days later. I carried her to the church myself." Silas looked into the fire. "That night I promised I'd never pass by again. So when I saw you all huddled in that busted wagon, I knew I'd either carry you home or dig 7 graves." Clara didn't say anything. Silas sipped from his mug. "You don't have to trust me. I earned my ghosts, but you're welcome to stay. And if we don't, I'll help you leave. Give you supplies. Enough to make it to the next town if the weather breaks." Clara stared at him. No threat. No guilt. Just truth. She nodded slowly. "We'll stay, for now." Behind her, Alice finally shifted closer to the fire. Her hand reached out trembling and took Maggie's. It was the first time she'd moved on her own in days. Silas watched without comment. Sam burped loudly, then clapped his own mouth in surprise. Everyone laughed, small and nervous but real. Clara smiled, just barely. Then she saw it, in the window. A flicker of light. She stood fast. "Silas." He followed her gaze. Then he moved quick to the door, opened it just a crack. Out there in the snow, a lantern bobbed through the darkness. Not alone. 3 men, and not friendly. Clara's hand found her knife again. Silas turned back, jaw set. "Stay quiet," he said, "and stay away from the windows." "Who is it?" Tommy asked. Silas looked at the children, then at Clara. "Trouble," he said, "and the kind that don't knock." The knock wasn't loud, but it cut through the warm hush of the cabin like a whip through air. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Silas didn't flinch. He slid the bolt across the door, slow and deliberate. Then he turned down the lamp nearest the entry, casting the room in softer shadows. From outside came a voice slurred and biting. "Silas Brennan." "You in there?" Clara's heart thudded in her ears. She motioned for the children to stay back. Maggie clutched Rosie close, retreating with Jonas and Alice behind the far cot. Tommy crouched by the hearth, eyes hard hand on the knife. Silas opened the peephole cut into the heavy wooden door and peered out. Then he sighed a quiet, wearied sound. "Clem Burrows," he muttered. "You know him," Clara whispered. "Used to ride fence with him. Before he found whiskey and decided fists made better friends." Silas unlatched the door just enough to step out and shut it behind him. Cold air rushed in like a warning, but Clara's eyes stayed locked on the door, straining for sound. Outside, boots crunched on snow, and a low murmur of voices rose and fell. Then sharper, Clem's drawl mocking. "Didn't peg you for the charity type, Silas? 7 orphans don't seem your style?" Silas's voice level and calm. "Ain't your business who's under my roof." Another voice chimed in, nasal, greasy. "Word is Preacher Crane's been looking for some runaways. Figures they'd fetch a good price back east. Folks pay for children, you know. Especially the quiet ones." Clara's hands curled into fists. Inside, Jonas looked at her, whispering. "Who's Preacher Crane? Bad news," Clara said flatly. "He's the reason we ran." Outside, Clem kept talking. "You got something that don't belong to you, Silas. You know how the law sees that." Silas didn't answer for a moment. Then, calm as a pond, he said, "Law's got nothing to do with this. That's so you take another step toward this house," Silas said, "and I won't ask twice." There was silence, then a rough laugh. "Always were a stubborn bastard. Still am." Bootsteps shifted. Something was muttered too low to hear. Then the crunch of retreating steps. Clara didn't breathe until she heard Silas's boots returning to the porch. He came in slow, face lined and jaw set. "They're gone for now. You think they'll come back?" Tommy asked. "They didn't come to chat? They'll talk to others? Maybe the sheriff, maybe Crane. Depends who's paying." Clara moved toward him. "You said you'd help us if we wanted to leave." "Is it time?" No, Silas said. "They saw your footprints in the snow. Even if you left now, they'd follow. You're safer here. For the moment." Silas walked to the fire, leaned against the mantel, and let out a breath. He looked tired. Tired in the bones. "What does Crane want?" Jonas asked, voice small. "He runs a place called Mercy Hollow." Clara said, her tone bitter. "Only there's no mercy in it. They call it an orphanage, but it's a mill. Kids cook, clean, sew day and night. If they cry, they get whipped. If they fall asleep, they get worse." Maggie hugged Rosie tighter. Alice's face was pale as ash. "Why'd you go there?" Sam asked. Clara's voice was low. "We didn't choose it. Our folks were gone, some to sickness, some to worse. The county sent us there. Said it was better than the streets." Tommy added, "It wasn't." Silas nodded once. "You did the right thing running." Clara eyed him. "You believe us? Just like that, I don't need to. I saw your hands, your eyes, how you watched the door. People don't fake that kind of fear. He pushed off the mantle. Let's get you settled proper. You'll stay in the east wing. I'll move my gear to the barn for now. You don't have to do that, Clara said. I do. She watched him head down the hallway, limping slightly. Jonas broke the silence. Why's he limping? No idea, Clara said. But I bet it's part of why he don't smile much. As the children moved to the bunks Silas had prepared, Clara lingered at the door. She peeked through the peephole. Snow still fell softer now, but the black beyond felt less like night and more like a presence. Watching. Waiting. She shut the peephole and turned back. Later, as they settled under patchwork quilts and threadbare blankets, silence fell. Not the tight silence of fear, but something deeper, like a held breath. Do you think he'll protect us? Maggie asked softly. Clara stared at the ceiling beams above, listening to the wind scratch at the shutters. I think she whispered he already did. A soft creak echoed from the floorboard outside their room. Then Silas's voice came low through the door. Sleep now. I'll keep watch. And in the dark, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not safety. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of trust. Just before sleep took her, she remembered Silas's warning that Clem and his men would talk, would stir things up. And when that happened, Preacher Crane would come. He always did. And this time he wouldn't come alone. He didn't ask for my story, he just handed me the reins and said, "We ride at your pace." The morning air carried the sharp scent of pine and thawing earth, but Clara couldn't shake the weight in her chest. She dreamt of cracked leather belts, cold cell floors, and the dry rasp of Reverend Crane's voice quoting scripture as punishment fell. The terror clung to her skin even as the dawn warmed the windows. Silas was already outside mending the fence along the south line. She watched him from the porch. His movements slow but steady, the limp in his right leg more pronounced this morning. Still he didn't pause, not even when he bent to lift a beam that looked too heavy for one man. He worked like a man who owed something to the world and hadn't yet paid it back. Why doesn't he just tell us what happened to his leg? Jonas asked, stepping up beside her with a tin mug of weak coffee. Because some things don't need words, Clara replied, her eyes on Silas. And some folks carry stories they've got no use sharing. That morning, Silas handed each child a chore. Maggie helped Cassie with the hens. Jonas was given the storeroom to organize. Alice stayed with Rosie, both girls sweeping the cabin's dusty floors. Tommy, to no one's surprise, ended up chopping kindling out back with Silas. Clara, though, was told simply, "Ride with me." She blinked. What for supplies? Ranch can't feed 8 mouths without some planning. Besides, you've got eyes. I need someone watching our backs. She didn't argue, just saddled the mare. He pointed to a brown and white pinto named Nellie and rode out beside him toward town. The trail was tight between tall pines, the snow thinning under their hooves, but still clinging to the shaded hollows. They rode for some time in silence. Clara adjusted her grip on the reins, her shoulders still tense. You always ride so stiff, he asked without looking at her. Don't usually ride with anyone. That. She gave a small nod. When you run long enough, you learn it's best not to trust saddles that ain't yours. Silas chuckled. I'll keep that in mind. They came to a stream, shallow but fast. He guided his horse across without hesitation. She followed the cold water, splashing her boots. On the other side, she glanced toward the ridge, instinct rising. Smoke, she said. Behind the rocks. He looked. Good eyes. Too clean for a campfire. That's Crane's men. Silas didn't argue, just changed course. Where are we going now? To someone who won't ask questions but might offer answers. An hour later, they pulled into the weathered yard of a homestead nestled between cottonwoods and a craggy bluff. A woman stepped out of the cabin apron, dusty rifle balanced across her arms. She wore her gray hair in 2 long braids, her face sun-worn and wise. "Well, if it isn't Silas Brennan," she said. "You bring trouble or company?" "Maybe both," he replied. "Clara meet Miss Odessa Graywater." The woman looked Clara over, eyes sharp but not unkind. "That your name, girl?" Clara nodded. "Well, I've known this fool of a man since he had both knees working and more hair than dust on his collar. If he brought you here, it's 'cause he thinks your life's worth keeping." They sat in Odessa's kitchen over cornbread and bitterroot tea. Clara listened as Silas and Odessa spoke in low tones about Clem Burrows, about the preacher's reach, and about how far a bribe might travel in a place like Dry Creek. "The sheriff's too deep in Crane's pocket," Odessa said flatly. "If he comes with papers, he'll try to use 'em. You need something stronger than a closed door." Clara frowned. Like what Odessa looked at her. "You got anything on him, proof?" Clara hesitated. "Not written. But I saw what he did to Jonas, the scars. Maggie saw him beat a girl for spilling soup." Odessa looked to Silas. "A child's word won't be enough. You'll need a witness, adult, and one who ain't afraid." Clara's voice sharpened. "Everyone's afraid." Silas stood setting his cup down. "Then we find someone who's angry instead." Odessa touched Clara's arm before they left. "You got a good sense about you, but you look like a girl carrying too many stories. Don't let them weigh you down so much you forget to live." Clara managed a faint smile. As they rode back, the light was turning gold through the trees. Silas didn't speak for a while, then said, "Odessa saved my life once, back when I thought pain was the only thing I had left." "What happened?" Clara asked. "My wife died. So did my baby girl. Fever took them quick, left me slower. I stopped talking, stopped eating, rode into a blizzard one night figuring I'd just freeze where I stood." He glanced at her. "Odessa found me, tied me to her mule, dragged me back. Spent 3 weeks forcing stew into me and cursing in Apache till I started answering." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I'm not. I needed the storm, but I needed her more." He looked ahead again. "That's why I opened the door that night. Not 'cause I'm noble. 'Cause I remember what it feels like when you're ready to disappear and someone says you don't have to." They rode the rest of the way in quiet understanding. At the barn gate, he stopped her. "I didn't ask for your story," he said. "Just handed you the reins." Clara nodded. Why, she asked. "'Cause it ain't mine to carry. But I figured if I gave you the choice, you might hand me a piece when you're ready." That night, as snow began to fall again, and the wind rustled the eaves, Clara lay awake, not with fear, but with something gentler. She thought of Odessa's eyes, of Silas's silence, of being seen without being picked apart. And somewhere between the sigh of the trees and the crackle of the fire, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to outrun the past anymore. She could face it, but facing it meant preparing for the knock that would surely come again. And this time it wouldn't be Clem. It would be Crane. He stood in the doorway with a Bible in one hand and a court order in the other, and not a drop of mercy in his eyes. It was the hollow thump of hooves on frozen ground that warned Clara first. She was hauling a pail of water from the well when she heard it measured, purposeful. Not like the friendly rhythm of a neighbor's visit. No, this was something different. Measured like boots in a church procession. Like a funeral. She didn't run. She turned slowly, setting the pail down without splashing. 5 riders crested the hill, their silhouettes black against the winter sky. At the front of them rode Reverend Josiah Crane, his coat too fine for the dust, his black horse trimmed like a show animal. His face was the same long and bony mouth, pinched, as if mercy soured his tongue. Behind him rode Clem Burrows and 3 others Clara didn't recognize. One of them wore a sheriff's badge that hadn't been polished in months. Another held a coil of rope draped over his saddle horn like it was casual. Clara didn't wait. She bolted for the house, her boots slipping on packed snow. She threw open the door and shouted, "Silas!" He was already moving. He tossed a rifle to Tommy, handed a second to Clara. "Get the kids to the back room. Maggie, bar the cellar door from inside. Jonas, light the back lamp and stay low. No one opens the door unless it's me." Silas stepped out just as Crane's boots hit the porch. "I don't recall sending an invitation," Silas said. Crane smiled like he'd just bitten into something rotten. "Didn't figure you for a man of letters, Brennan, but I've brought one anyhow." He held up a folded document stamped and sealed. "This here's an order from Judge Brackett of Dry Creek, authorizing the removal of 7 minors from your custody. Seems they belong to the jurisdiction of the church-run Mercy Hollow Orphanage." Silas didn't move. "That judge's wife sits on Crane's board," he said flatly. "And everyone knows Brackett signs what Crane writes." The sheriff spoke up, voice dull and uncertain. "It's signed Legal Silas. Paper says what it says." "That paper was bought," Silas snapped. "Just like the lawman holding it." Crane took a step forward. "I am not here to debate ethics. I am here to retrieve property." "They ain't property," Silas said. "They're children." Crane's eyes narrowed. "Children abandoned by kin, found squatting, taken in by a man with no legal standing. This isn't a sanctuary, Brennan. This is an unlawful holding." Inside, Clara stood behind the curtain with the others, rifle tight in her grip. Her pulse pounded, but her hand didn't shake. Not this time. She watched Crane's mouth move, saw his coat ripple in the breeze, and remembered the sting of switch lashes and the screams in the night halls of Mercy Hollow. "I'm giving you one chance," Crane said. "You hand them over and I'll leave you be." "No," Silas said simply. Crane straightened. "Then I'll take them." He motioned to Clem, who stepped forward, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. But before he could climb the steps, a sharp crack echoed through the air, followed by a hiss of steam. Clara had fired a warning shot into the snow pile at the foot of the porch. "You'll take us over our dead bodies," she said, stepping out with the rifle aimed steady. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped cold and clear like water from a spring. Crane blinked. Silas didn't look surprised. Behind Clara, Tommy appeared rifle cocked. Maggie stood near the door with Rosie behind her, clutching a wooden spoon, but holding it like a saber. Jonas stepped to the side with a lantern in one hand and a journal in the other. Alice clutched a rag doll so hard its yarn arm tore loose. Silas looked at Crane. "This is the family you call stolen goods." Crane's eyes swept over the children, his expression hardening like frostbite. "You're harboring fugitives. That's a federal offense." "I'm protecting children," Silas growled. "Then you'll face the consequences. I already have." Crane gave a short nod. "So be it." He turned on his heel and stalked to his horse. The sheriff lingered, shifting in the saddle. "Silas, you know I can't stop him. You could try. I'd lose my badge." "Then lose it," Clara said. "Or keep it and lose your soul." The sheriff flushed red and rode after Crane, Clem, and the others, following without a word. When the horses disappeared down the trail, Clara's knees buckled. Silas caught her by the arm. "You did good," he said. "I thought I was going to throw up." "Still might. That's part of courage." Inside the cabin was quiet. Rosie had begun to cry, not from fear, but the kind of crying that comes when a small child sees grown folks standing between them and harm. Silas crouched down beside her. "You hungry little one?" She nodded through hiccups. "Well then, Maggie, what say you help me make some cornbread, and maybe stew too?" Clara leaned against the wall, the rifle still cradled in her arms. "That won't be the last of it." "No," Silas agreed. "Now it gets harder." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "Odessa gave me this. Said I should send for an old friend, Judge Ezra Harrison. Retired but not rusted. One of the few left who still reads law by conscience. You trust him?" Silas met her gaze. "I trust Odessa, and I trust a man who once jailed a mayor for embezzling church funds, even when that mayor was his cousin." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, but direction. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We write a letter, we gather what proof we can, we prepare the children, and we make ready." "For what? For a storm that don't come from the sky." Outside wind began to whistle through the gaps in the barn siding. Snowflakes drifted down quiet and slow. Inside, Clara stepped toward the table, the weight of the rifle still in her hands. She didn't feel like a girl anymore. She felt like something older. And somewhere out there, the Reverend Crane would be plotting, gathering names, preparing lies. But here in this house, truth had taken root, and it would not be dug up without a fight. She said, "The courts only listen when the truth is written down, carved in pain and ink and read aloud by someone who still believes in justice." The pen scratched softly against the paper as Jonas hunched over the kitchen table, the oil lamp flickering at his elbow. His handwriting, once neat and measured, now trembled slightly with each loop and stroke. Silas sat across from him, arms folded, eyes fixed on the letter as it took form. Clara stood near the stove, arms crossed, watching them both. It had been 3 days since Crane rode up with his court order. 3 days of silence on the ridge. 3 days of dread simmering under their ribs. Silas's voice was low. "Write exactly what you remember. Don't soften it. Don't spare him." Jonas nodded but didn't lift his head. "It's hard to say it all." Silas's tone gentled. "That's why it matters." Odessa's words still rang in Clara's ears. "The truth has weight, girl, but it only moves the world when someone brave enough lifts it." They were building a case, one that could stand before Judge Harrison when he arrived, if he arrived. Odessa had sent the telegram 3 days ago. The wire station in Jericho was unpredictable, and roads even more so. Tommy sat on the floor near the hearth, carving a stick into something sharp. Maggie was in the loft helping Alice and Rosie with a memory box, each child contributing one thing they could describe. From Mercy Hollow, a door, a sound, a cry in the dark. Pieces of pain stitched into testimony. "Is this how you fight a man like Crane?" Clara asked aloud. "With paper, you fight him with what he fears most," Silas said. A light turned toward his darkness. He stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a worn, leather-bound book. Inside was a ledger, ranch, records, dates, purchases. "Crane took money from Dry Creek's tithes 2 years running," Silas said. "Bought feed and horses for his personal stock under the orphanage account." Brackett looked the other way. "You have proof, receipts. Odessa's husband kept a copy. Church treasurer before he died." Clara felt a flicker of something fierce stir in her chest. "Then we don't just testify," she said. "We expose him." The door creaked open, and Odessa stepped in snow, clinging to her boots and the hem of her coat. Her cheeks were red, breath visible as she shut the door behind her. "Bad news," she said, unwrapping her scarf. "Crane's filed for emergency hearing. Judge Brackett'll hear it at noon in Jericho." Silas's jaw tightened. "That gives us less than a day." I wired Ezra again. Told him to meet us at the station by sunrise if he means to stand between Crane and hell. Clara's stomach twisted. What if he doesn't come? Odessa gave her a look sharp enough to slice bark. Then we go anyway. She dropped a cloth bundle on the table, letters, ledgers, affidavits from former workers of Mercy Hollow who'd escaped or aged out. We've got stories, names, dates, but they'll want to hear it from the mouths that lived it. Jonas spoke softly. Then we'll speak. Clara nodded. We all will. They packed what they could, documents, copies, witness letters, Clara's own testimony scratched in blocky handwriting. Silas bundled everything into a satchel and slung it over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. They would leave before dawn. Maggie and Odessa would stay back with Rosie and Alice. Clara, Silas, Jonas, and Tommy would ride to Jericho. It had to be the older ones, the ones who'd seen the worst. That night the cabin was quiet, the fire burning low. Clara couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her, watching the sky dim behind the pines. Odessa joined her after a while, carrying 2 tin mugs of warmed cider. You think we have a chance? Clara asked. Odessa didn't answer at first. She sipped her cider, then said, The courts only listen when the truth is written down, carved in pain and ink, and read aloud by someone who still believes in justice. Clara nodded. I don't know if I do. You will, Odessa said. Tomorrow when you look that man in the eye and speak the thing he tried to bury, you'll believe in it. Because it's yours. And nothing he owns can take that back. Clara swallowed hard. I hate him. That's all right, Odessa said. So long as you don't let it stop you from speaking. The next morning, before dawn cracked the sky, the 4 of them stood by the barn with their horses saddled. Jonas held the satchel to his chest, like it was breakable. Tommy had tied a knife to his belt, quiet but alert. Silas checked the straps on Clara's saddle one last time. You ride behind me. Let the words be your shield. Clara met his eyes. And if they don't listen, he nodded toward Jonas. Then the ledger speaks louder. Odessa placed a firm hand on Clara's shoulder. Go with fire, girl. Not fear. They mounted up and rode into the dark, the trail crunching beneath them, the wind cold in their teeth. By the time the sky lightened to ash gray, the steeple of Jericho came into view. Smoke curled from chimneys. The courthouse rose above the square like a stone tomb. A single man stood on the platform near the rail station, coat flapping in the wind. Silas squinted. Ezra. Clara exhaled in relief. Judge Ezra Harrison looked older than the hills, but stood straighter than any lawman Clara had seen. He held a cane and wore a coat lined with years of hard winters. You Silas Brennan? He asked. I am. The judge looked at Clara, then at the boys. These the children. Clara stepped forward. We're the witnesses. He gave a small nod. Then let's make sure the law hears what it's tried not to see. And together they walked toward the courthouse, the satchel swinging between them, like the weight of 100 silenced voices, finally ready to be heard. The courtroom went still when Jonas opened his mouth, because a child's truth spoken clear and unshaking is harder to ignore than 100 sermons. The courtroom smelled like old paper, cracked wood, and dust. Clara sat on the hard bench, back straight, fingers laced tight in her lap. Her heart knocked against her ribs like it wanted out. Tommy sat beside her, face carved from stone. Jonas stood by the judge's table, the satchel resting near his boots, its contents already laid out like evidence in a trial not yet declared. Reverend Crane arrived with 3 men in tailored coats and sharp boots. His voice rang out with the false confidence of a man who'd grown used to bending rooms to his will. This is a mockery, he sneered. These are children, not litigants. You drag me here over scribbles and accusations. Judge Brackett slouched on the bench like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, glanced toward Judge Harrison. This isn't your jurisdiction, Ezra. Judge Harrison didn't blink. When corruption twists the law, any man with honor has jurisdiction. Brackett's lips thinned. Clara's eyes stayed locked on Crane. His gaze flicked toward her, calculating, as if trying to measure how much of his past she could truly drag into the light. Silas stepped forward. We're not here to argue scripture or politics. We're here with records, sworn letters, and first-hand testimony. Harrison nodded. Then let's begin. The bailiff called Jonas first. He moved to the stand, thin shoulders set like steel. His boots barely reached the floor, but he didn't fidget. He didn't blink much either. State your name, Judge Harrison said. Jonas Pike. How old are you? 13. Do you know the difference between a truth and a lie? Yes, sir. What happens when someone lies? People get hurt. Harrison nodded. Tell us what happened at Mercy Hollow. Jonas looked at the paper in front of him, then folded it closed and pushed it aside. I thought I'd forget, he said, but I didn't. Not any of it. He spoke in a voice clear enough to fill every corner of the room. About the bread moldy with green fuzz. About cleaning the latrines with no gloves. About the girl who got slapped for speaking to her brother. About the punishments that came after dark with no witnesses but the walls. Crane leaned forward. Baseless stories. Sit down, Reverend Harrison said, steel in his voice. You'll have your turn. Jonas continued, voice never cracking. I saw him take money from the church box. I saw Clem sell the crates marked for Mercy Hollow's food. He laughed and said we'd get by on scraps. The room stayed silent, not a cough or chair creak. Just the sound of a child telling the truth, piece by brutal piece. When Jonas finished, he stepped down and returned to Clara's side, pale but steady. She gripped his hand. Then Tommy stood. He didn't go to the stand. He walked straight to Crane. You remember me? He asked, voice low. Crane stared at him like he'd stepped in mud. No, you should, Tommy said. I was the boy you hit with the cane for singing too loud. Judge Harrison raised a hand. You'll speak from the front, son. Tommy moved to the bench. I'm not good with words, but I remember pain. And I remember a man who quoted the Bible while locking the pantry for 3 days straight because someone dropped a bowl. He turned his eyes to the room. He calls it a home. It's a prison. Worse than one. Because in prison you at least know you did something wrong. Harrison looked at Brackett. You hearing this? Brackett shifted uncomfortably. Crane rose, suddenly face red. This is a farce, children damaged emotional. How can their words stand against mine? I run an institution respected by dozens of counties, Clara stood. Maybe that's the problem. The entire room turned toward her. She walked slowly to the bench, voice even. I watched him rip up letters sent by families looking for their lost kin. I watched girls cry through the night and boys flinch when the bells rang. I watched a boy named Elijah disappear after calling him a liar. No one asked questions. She reached into her coat and pulled a small, torn drawing stick figures in a field, a crude sun in the corner. Elijah drew this the day before he vanished. He said it was the first thing he'd give his mama when he saw her again. She never got it. Clara looked Crane square in the face. We're not all scared of you anymore. Crane laughed bitterly. Children talk, children lie. Judge Harrison stood. So do men in collars. He reached for the ledgers. Here are financial records cross-referenced with public tithe reports. Here are letters from former staff detailing embezzlement, abuse, and falsified records. He turned to Judge Brackett. "What say you now?" Brackett was silent. The kind of silence that grows when guilt roots deep. Finally, he cleared his throat. I believe we require further investigation." "You required that years ago," Harrison said. "But you chose to look away." A loud creak drew all eyes to the door. Odessa stepped in, followed by 2 elderly men and 1 woman. She nodded to Harrison. "These are former workers from Crane's orphanage. One was his bookkeeper. The other 2 ran the kitchens. They're ready to speak." Crane's face twisted. "You've got no legal—" "You're right," Harrison cut in. "But truth doesn't wait for your permission." Crane bolted. He turned for the back door, but 2 deputies moved in from behind. "You're under arrest for fraud, abuse, and obstruction," one of them said. "Judge Harrison signed the warrant an hour ago." As they cuffed him, Crane's eyes locked on Clara. "This changes nothing," he hissed. "The world still forgets children like you." Clara stepped forward. "Then we'll make it remember." As he was dragged out, a heavy silence fell again. This time it felt like a weight lifted. Judge Harrison turned to the children. "You were heard today. You were believed. The court orders Mercy Hollow to be shut down and full investigation to begin." He looked at Silas. "What you did here, you gave them more than shelter. You gave them a voice." Clara's heart swelled. Not with vengeance, with something gentler. Justice. But even as they stepped outside into the sun, Clara knew this wasn't the end. There was still healing ahead. Still pieces of broken pasts to pick up. Still the question of where they belonged now, and whether Silas's old house might become more than just a refuge, but a home. Home wasn't a place you ran to, it was the ground you stayed and fought for even when your legs trembled. The ride back from Jericho was quieter than the ride in. Not from fear this time, but from something heavier release. Like a tightly wound spring had finally snapped, and the tension left behind a strange emptiness. Jonas leaned against Silas's back as they rode, eyes fluttering closed between jolts of the saddle. Tommy, riding beside Clara, stared out at the woods like he was seeing the world for the first time. Clara, though, stayed alert. The wind felt different now, brisk but not biting. For the first time in years, she wasn't watching the shadows. She was watching the road ahead. When they crested the ridge and saw the cabin in the valley, Rosie was the first one out the door, her little legs pumping across the snowy yard. Maggie followed, arms outstretched. Alice stood behind them, blinking at the riders like she didn't quite believe they'd come back whole. Clara dismounted and was nearly knocked over by Rosie's hug. She dropped to her knees, wrapping the child in her arms. Maggie crashed into them both a heartbeat later. Tommy grinned just a flicker and ruffled Maggie's hair. "Told you we'd come back." Inside, Odessa already had stew bubbling and cornbread warming on the stove. The cabin was alive with warmth, not just from the fire, but from something older, something earned. "Was it hard?" Maggie asked between bites. Jonas looked up from his bowl. "Yes, but we did it," Clara teased. He gave a shy smile. "Okay, mostly Clara." Silas sat near the fire boots off his bad leg, stretched out. "That judge, Harrison," he said, "told me something before we left. Said justice is a road, not a room. Don't stop walking just because you made it to the porch." Clara looked around the room, the mismatched chairs, the patched blankets, the cracked floorboards that creaked in winter. She swallowed. "Do you think this place could ever really be home?" Silas didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached behind the mantel and pulled down a box none of them had seen before. Inside were old deeds, a photograph of a woman with kind eyes holding a baby wrapped in wool and a folded paper stained with time. He passed the paper to Clara. It was a land deed. The ranch, all 80 acres, registered under his name. "I've been thinking," Silas said. "I don't have kin left. No one to pass this to. But that doesn't mean it ends with me." Clara stared at the paper, throat tight. "You mean to give us the ranch?" Jonas asked, stunned. Silas smiled faintly. "If you want it." "But we're not even—" Clara began, then stopped herself. "You are now," he said. "It wasn't legal yet, no papers signed, no formalities settled, but it felt real." Tommy stood pacing a little. "We'd have to work it." "We already do," Maggie said proudly. "There's fencing to mend," Tommy said. "Roof leaks in the north loft. And planting in spring," Silas added. Jonas raised his hand, joking. "I call dibs on books and inventory." They all laughed, soft, unfamiliar laughter, but whole. Odessa watched them with a smile in her eyes. "Told you they'd find their place." Later that night, when the others were asleep and the fire burned low, Clara sat on the porch with Silas. The moon was high silver over the pines. "I've never had a place that didn't feel borrowed," she said. "Like I was just passing through." He nodded. "That was me. After my wife and daughter passed, I couldn't bear the quiet. So I filled it with chores, noise, distance." Clara looked over at him. "Why did you open the door that night, when you saw us?" Silas was quiet a moment, because the quiet got too loud. "And I remembered something my wife said once. She said, 'If you can't save the whole world, save the part that lands at your feet.'" Clara swallowed hard. "I want to stay. You don't need to say it now." "I do," she said, "because I mean it. I want to stay and fight for this place. I'm tired of running." Silas nodded slowly. "Then it's yours, Clara. Not just the ranch, the right to stand your ground." That night she didn't dream of switches or cold hallways or locked pantry doors. She dreamed of a field warmed by spring rows of seedlings pushing up through thawed soil, Rosie chasing butterflies, Maggie hanging laundry, Tommy teaching Sam how to hammer nails, Jonas lost in a book beneath the cottonwoods. She dreamed of home, and when she woke, the first thing she saw was the rising sun lighting up the worn wood beams above her. She rose dressed and stepped outside into the chill. Silas was already in the barn. She joined him, and without a word, they began to work side by side, rhythm in sync. There was no declaration, no ceremony. Just hands and soil hammers striking nails, water drawn from the well stories told between tasks. It wasn't borrowed anymore. It was earned. And as Clara tightened the last rail on the split wood fence, she looked out at the land that once felt like a hiding place. Now it felt like a beginning, because home wasn't a place you ran to. It was the ground you stayed and fought for even when your legs trembled. Even when the past whispered. Even when you weren't sure you deserved it. You fought. And sometimes the fight itself was what made it yours. The day the roof caved in, it wasn't just wood and shingles. It was everything I'd held together by will alone. The storm came out of nowhere. One moment, the sky above the ranch was calm, streaked with early spring light. The next, it had turned the color of old ash and bruised metal. Winds howled over the ridge, shaking fence posts and bending the tree limbs low enough to snap. Clara had just come in from checking the back field when the first gust tore a shutter clean off the window. It clattered across the porch like a warning. Rosie squealed from her spot by the hearth, dropping the rag doll she'd been stitching a patch into. "Everyone inside," Clara shouted. "Secure the doors." Silas was already in the barn with Tommy, trying to brace the loft beams that had grown soft with moisture. Clara raced toward them, her coat snapping around her legs, wine tugging at her like fingers trying to hold her back. "Silas!" she yelled, yanking the barn door open. It's coming hard. You've got to get out. She didn't finish. A thundercrack split the air and the center rafter gave way. It happened fast. A sound like the earth splitting, dust and hay choking the air. Then a beam crashed down between her and Silas, sending shards of timber flying. She screamed his name. He didn't answer. Tommy scrambled forward, dragging Silas by the arms, his face cut and covered in grit. Clara leapt over the debris and helped haul him clear just before the rest of the loft collapsed. They dragged him into the cabin, Odessa and Maggie rushing to lay out blankets, boil water-pack ice against the swelling bruise spreading across Silas's ribs. "He's breathing," Odessa said, "but he's not waking up." The cabin filled with a hush deeper than silence, the kind that pressed on your chest. Clara knelt beside the bed, her hands trembling. The roof hadn't just caved in. It felt like her strength had gone with it. Outside, the wind beat against the walls like it wanted in. The ranch groaned and creaked under the weight of it all. Jonas took charge of boarding up the windows. Maggie gathered the children in the cellar with candles and blankets. Odessa moved with her usual calm, but her eyes flicked to Silas often, her mouth set in a hard line. "I should have seen it coming," Clara whispered, pressing a cold cloth to his forehead. "That beam was loose. I saw it sagging last week and didn't say anything." Odessa placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've been carrying too much. That's not weakness. That's just time catching up." Clara shook her head. "He's the one who holds us together. I don't know what to do without him." "You already do," Odessa said. "You just don't know it yet." By morning, the storm passed, leaving broken fences, scattered shingles, and the barn half buried in its own bones. But Silas still hadn't stirred. Clara didn't sleep. She stayed at his side, wiping sweat from his brow, whispering things she couldn't bring herself to say when he was awake. "You gave me a place to stand," she said, "when I didn't even believe I deserved it. You didn't ask for anything. Just handed me the reins and let me lead. I'm not ready for you to leave." Jonas entered quietly, a pot of weak coffee in his hands. "You should rest." "I can't," she said. "What if he wakes up and I'm not here?" "He'd forgive you," Jonas said, "because you stayed." Outside, Tommy was already clearing the debris, his coat soaked with sweat despite the cold. Maggie was in the kitchen trying to make something from dried beans and cornmeal. The younger kids whispered softly, unsure if the air in the house was too sacred to break. It was Clara who took Silas's ledger down from the mantel, opened to the last marked page, and began writing. Repairs needed. Fence line down near the south gully, shingles missing on porch, barn half gone, and then in a new line, if Silas doesn't wake up, what happens to us? She stared at the sentence, then crossed it out. Instead, she wrote, "We stay, we rebuild." The next morning, the sound of coughing woke her, rough and dry. She flew to the bedside. Silas's eyes were open, squinting at the light. "Did we win the war?" he rasped. She laughed and cried in the same breath. "You stubborn old fool," she whispered. His hand found hers, weak but steady. "Did the barn fall?" "Yeah." "Damn! I liked that barn." She pressed his fingers tighter. "I thought I lost you." "You almost did," he said. "Would have been all right. I'd have gone knowing you could carry the rest." "Don't talk like that. I mean it. This place. It's not just wood and soil anymore, it's you. All of you." He coughed again, then said, "Tell me what we've got left." Clara wiped her face and opened the ledger. 2 goats, 4 chickens, 1 collapsed barn, roof damage, broken fence line, 1 wounded rancher. "Sounds like a start," he murmured. She leaned in close. "We're gonna fix it. Together." "Damn right we will." Later that day, when the sun climbed higher and the dust settled from the broken barn, Clara stepped outside with Odessa. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the land they refused to leave. "You held it all together," Odessa said. "No," Clara said. "I just didn't let it fall apart." "Same thing, girl." The others began trickling out, forming a line of silhouettes against the sky. Jonas with a notebook and pencil behind his ear, Maggie carrying a sack of seed, Tommy with rope in hand ready to patch the pen. Even little Rosie came out dragging a stick like a plow. They had lost a building, but they hadn't lost each other. Clara looked at them, her heart aching in the best kind of way. The day the roof caved in, it had taken more than timber. But what rose from that wreckage, what stood now, was stronger. Because they'd chosen to stay. To fight for the ground beneath them. Not just for shelter. For home. We didn't rebuild the barn to forget what broke, we rebuilt it, so the ones who came after would know we survived. The ruins of the barn stood like bones against the pale sky, sharp angles jutting where the roof had once stretched wide and whole. Clara stood before it, arms crossed, breath fogging in the cold morning air. The wind had calmed, but the memory of the storm still hung like smoke over the ranch. Tommy tightened the last rope around a stack of salvaged planks and stepped back. "We got enough to frame it, not much more." Clara nodded. "It doesn't have to be pretty, just strong." They didn't wait for more lumber to arrive. Didn't wait for perfect weather or a full crew. They started with what they had: scrap boards, bent nails, and their own hands. Maggie boiled pitch in the old iron pot for sealing seams. Jonas sketched out the beam structure from memory. Even little Sam handed up nails and ran water from the pump, his cheeks red with purpose. Silas watched from the porch for the first 2 days, his ribs too tender to move much, his voice hoarse from yelling instructions across the yard. "Your brace angles are off," he muttered once. "They're fine," Clara called back. "I ain't dying just to have that barn fall on me twice," he growled. By the 3rd day, he stood leaning on a cane Odessa carved for him out of a mesquite branch. "Don't make me use this to point out your mistakes," he warned. She grinned. "Then grab a hammer and fix them yourself." He chuckled, wincing. "Don't tempt me. It wasn't fast work, and it wasn't easy." The wind cut through their coats, the boards split more often than not, and their hands blistered raw. But piece by piece, wall by wall, the barn rose again. Alice hung a drawing of the old barn on one of the new beams. A child's sketch in colored pencil, lopsided but hopeful. Rosie added a flower underneath it, drawn in chalk. "We should carve something into the wood," Jonas said one afternoon, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "To mark it." "Like what Maggie asked." "Something true," he said. Tommy looked up from the hayloft. "Then write, 'We survived.'" They did. Clara carved the words herself into the inside post by the entry. The letters were crooked, deep, and full of meaning. We survived. That same evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the lumber gold, a wagon creaked over the ridge. Dust trailed behind it like a veil. Clara stepped forward, shading her eyes. "We expecting anyone?" No, Silas said, already stepping onto the porch with his cane. The wagon rolled into the yard and came to a stop. A man climbed down, tall, weathered, and carrying a bundle under one arm. "Name's Lowell Carter," he said. "Used to run with the marshal's office in Wichita. Heard about what y'all did to that orphan mill in Jericho. Thought maybe you could use a hand." He tossed the bundle to Clara. Inside were tools, real ones. A full set of hand-forged hammers, braces, and sharpened chisels. "You're welcome to stay," Silas said without hesitation. "We got chores enough to keep a dozen men busy." Lowell tipped his hat. "Then I'll earn my plate." Over the following week, more folks came. A widow from Red Bluff who'd lost her boy to Mercy Hollow and wanted to tend goats. A young couple with nowhere left to go and calloused palms ready for work. Two brothers from the Choctaw Nation who offered to help raise a new fence line in exchange for a bed and bread. Clara stood one morning on the barn roof with a hammer in hand and looked down at the gathering. It wasn't just the ranch anymore. It was growing into something else. Silas, she said that night by the fire. What if this place wasn't just for us? He leaned back in the old chair, one leg resting on a stool. What do you mean? What if it was a place for folks who've been knocked down, who need a start, or just a place to rest? You thinking of turning this into a home for strays, he teased. She smiled. I was one. He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded slowly. Then maybe that's exactly what it's for. The next day, she wrote the words on a board and nailed it to the barn. Brennan's Haven. Below it, they carved a second line. All are welcome. They didn't throw a celebration when the barn was done. There wasn't time. There were eggs to gather wood to split meals to make. But that evening, as the sun set behind the pines, Clara sat on the top rail and looked out across the yard. Children chased each other through the grass. Adults moved between chores with easy laughter. Smoke curled from the chimney like a banner of peace. Silas joined her, leaning on his cane. Didn't think I'd live to see this, he said. You built it. He shook his head. No. You did. They watched the wind ripple across the fields. The barn stood tall again, not as it was, but better built, with more hands, more heart. It won't always be easy, he said. More folks means more problems, more weight, Clara smiled. Then we carry it together. He looked over at her quiet for a long moment. You've become more than I ever hoped. She didn't answer, just rested her hand on the post beside her where the words were carved. We survived. But that wasn't enough anymore. Now they would thrive. Now they would become the kind of place people remembered not for what had broken, but for what had been built in its place. They didn't come asking for handouts. They came with calloused hands and a look that said, "Let me belong." Spring settled into the valley with the quiet determination of someone reclaiming their place. Snow gave way to damp earth, the frozen fence posts loosened in the thaw, and the first green shoots poked through the churned soil behind the barn. The air smelled of warming sap and firewood smoke, like hope learning to breathe again. Clara had always marked seasons by what they took, but this one for the first time was giving. It started with a girl. She showed up just past dawn barefoot with blood dried along one shin and her coat torn at the shoulder. She didn't speak at first, just stood at the edge of the property looking at the barn like it was a lighthouse she wasn't sure was real. Clara found her by the corral. You lost? She asked. The girl didn't answer. She couldn't have been more than 12. Dirt smudged her jaw. Her knuckles were scraped raw. Clara didn't press, just offered water and a seat on the porch. An hour later, the girl spoke. Name's June. Clara, is this place safe? Clara didn't lie. It's safer than most. June stayed. A week later, it was a man with his daughter in tow. He looked worn down to the bone sleeves, frayed one boot stitched with wire. He carried a crate with a rooster inside and a tin of dried beans. I heard this was a place for the thrown away, he said. Clara smiled. We prefer found again. By the end of the month, 5 more had come. A young widow with soot-stained hands from a fire that had taken her house. A boy who didn't talk, but watched everything with wide, unblinking eyes. A man named Rafe who arrived with a mule and a violin and never explained either. Silas had watched the arrivals from the porch, his face unreadable. One evening, Clara joined him there, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. You worried? She asked. He sipped the brew. No, just wondering how far this will go. As far as it needs to, she said. We said all are welcome. We didn't put a number on it. He looked out across the yard, where children chased chickens, where the smell of stew drifted from the cookhouse, where the hammering of new bunkhouse walls echoed into the dusk. They're not just staying, he said. They're building. Clara nodded. That's the point. It wasn't a charity. It wasn't a rescue mission. It was a forge. Everyone who came contributed, some with skills, some with stories, some with silence that slowly unfurled into song. Rafe played his violin in the evenings, soft melodies that floated through the windows like lullabies for weary hearts. June helped Maggie with the goats, quiet and careful, but fierce if anyone touched them wrong. The widow Mary took over the kitchen, teaching Rosie how to knead bread, and Alice how to season beans until they tasted like more than survival. Tommy organized a fence-building crew. Jonas started a school corner in the loft chalkboard slates and a rotating shelf of books that grew with each new arrival. Clara watched it all unfold, like she was reading a story she hadn't written, but somehow knew the ending to. One night, while mending a gate latch, she caught Silas watching her. What she asked. You've become the kind of person people look for in the dark, he said. She blinked. That sounds like something Odessa would say. It is, he chuckled. She said it to me once, and I didn't understand it until now. That same week a letter arrived, postmarked from Dry Creek, addressed in a tidy, unfamiliar hand. Clara read it aloud to Silas by lamplight. Dear Miss Clara and Mr. Brennan, I was one of the nurses at Mercy Hollow. I left years ago but kept the names of every child I knew. I heard what you did, what you stood up for. I've kept records, birth names, family notes, even letters that were hidden away. If you want them, I'll bring them myself. There are children out there still waiting to be found. With gratitude, Miriam Hart Clara folded the letter with care, her throat tight. We have to help her, she said. Silas nodded. She's one of us now. So they cleared space in the storage room, built shelves, set up a ledger system. Rafe offered to ride out once a week for letters. Jonas offered to categorize every name. They weren't just rebuilding people anymore. They were reconnecting them. The ranch became more than Brennan's haven. It became a place where history was reclaimed, where the lost found their surnames, their kin, their forgotten corners of the world. One night around the fire, Clara stood before the growing group, nearly 20 now, and cleared her throat. When I came here, she said, I didn't know if I could trust a roof. I didn't know if safety was real or just something people told kids to keep them quiet. She looked around at the firelit faces. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know this: none of us are alone anymore, and that's enough to keep building. There were no cheers, just nods, a few smiles, and one hand raised slowly like a new leaf unfurling. It was June. I'd like to help teach reading, she said softly. I was good at it, before. Clara nodded, heartful. Then we'll build a bigger blackboard. Later, as the fire burned low and the stars blinked above the pines, Silas rested back in his chair. We're going to need more cabins, he said. Clara laughed, and more spoons. But what they needed most, what they were gathering day by day, wasn't something you could measure in boards or bedding. It was belief. In each other. In second chances. In the quiet, defiant act of choosing to belong. Because they didn't come asking for handouts. They came with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much. And they stayed because someone opened a door and said, you still matter. And meant it. He never needed to say the words. Every fence he fixed, every plate he passed, every time he stood watch at night, he was telling us, I chose you. The evening was quiet, the kind of stillness that only came after a long day's labor, and the hush of satisfaction that followed. The sun melted into the hills, turning the sky soft with gold and smoke-blue shadows. Clara stood by the porch rail, watching the new bunkhouse rise like a promise just beyond the corral. She could hear Rafe's fiddle faintly in the distance, and Maggie's laughter as she taught Rosie how to stir biscuit dough with care. Silas had gone into town earlier that day, said he needed nails and seed, but Clara had known it was more than that. He'd grown slower these past weeks. The bruises from the barn collapse never fully faded, and though he never said a word, she noticed the pauses, the way he'd catch his breath before speaking, the way he leaned on the cane just a little more each time. When she saw his figure coming up the trail, shoulders stooped under the evening light, she met him halfway. "You get what you needed?" she asked. Mostly he grunted, setting the sack of grain down on a barrel. She eyed him. "You're pale. I'm old." She didn't smile. "You okay?" He leaned against the post and looked out over the land, the smoke from the cook fire, the kids racing sticks down the creek, the outline of the new barn catching the dying light just right. "This place," he said, voice rough, "it's more than I imagined it could be." Clara stepped beside him. "You built it." He shook his head. "No, I just opened the door." That night the wind shifted, the weather turned, clouds moved in heavy and low. By morning Silas didn't rise. Clara found him still in bed, eyes closed, breath shallow. Odessa came quietly, pressing her hand to his brow, her other to his chest. "He's fading," she said softly, "like an ember." They didn't panic. They didn't cry. Instead, the whole ranch stilled. Maggie brought water warm with mint. Jonas sat by the bed and read from a worn book of Psalms in a voice steadier than his years. Tommy stepped outside to stand guard, shoulders squared to the wind like it might try to take Silas by force. Clara stayed beside him, holding his hand. He stirred once, eyes cracking open. "You remember what I told you?" he whispered. She nodded, voice tight. "About carrying the rest, about keeping the doors open." His eyes softened. "You did more than keep it open. You made it a home. I didn't do it alone." "No," he rasped. "You did it with love." He squeezed her hand faintly. "Tell them I chose them. Everyone. Not out of pity, not duty." He coughed a dry, weak sound. "Tell them it was always love." "You'll tell them yourself," she said, fighting the tightness in her throat. But his gaze drifted past her toward the window. "I see her. Who, my wife?" Clara felt the tears come. "She's smiling," he whispered, and then he was gone. No gasping, no pain, just a breath that didn't return. Clara sat there, her hand still in his. The room remained still, like the world was holding its breath. Then Odessa moved to close his eyes, murmuring a prayer in her native tongue, words that felt like earth and sky meeting. Outside, the wind calmed. By evening, the barn bell rang once, slow and deep. Not for warning, for mourning. The children gathered near the porch. The adults came with covered dishes and blankets. No one told them to. They just knew. They built a pyre the next morning out behind the north field, where the cottonwoods grew thick and tall. Silas had once said it was the best place on the ranch to watch the stars. They wrapped him in the old patchwork quilt, one stitched together by Maggie, Odessa, Clara, and even little Rosie, square by square over the winter. Jonas read the words Silas once wrote in the ledger. "This land don't belong to me. It belongs to the ones who keep it breathing, who feed it, protect it, love it. And when I'm gone, I hope they remember I didn't just take them in. I chose them. Every day." They lit the fire at sunset. No one spoke for a long time. just watched the flame rise up and crackle against the darkening sky. Then Clara stepped forward. She held Silas's cane in one hand and in the other a new sign carved by Tommy. She planted it near the barn deep in the ground. Brennan's Haven, founded on love, carried by family. She turned to the gathering, her voice low but clear. He never needed to say the words. Every fence he fixed, every plate he passed, every time he stood watch. At night he was telling us, I chose you. Heads bowed, hands found hands. No one rushed away when the fire died down. They sat through the night sharing stories, laughter, even silence. Because grief didn't have to roar, it could settle gently too, like morning mist after a long rain. The next day, Clara opened the ledger. She flipped to the last written page and in her own neat hand began a new one. First spring without Silas. Fences held. Barns dry. Bunkhouse at capacity. Children fed. Letters still coming. New faces arriving. Then she paused and wrote, He didn't leave us empty. He left us full. Jonas passed by and set a folded piece of paper beside her. That letter came today. It was from a boy named Eli. Said he'd been at Mercy Hollow once. Said he heard about a place where people got to start over. Think we've got room for one more? Jonas asked. Clara smiled through her tears. We always do. And she turned the page ready to write the next name. The educational lesson learned from this story is that a true home is not defined by walls or ownership, but by the choice to stand with others when they are most vulnerable. Life often asks us, especially in later years, to measure success not by what we accumulated, but by who we protected, guided, and welcomed along the way. Even quiet acts, opening a door, listening without judgment, staying when it would be easier to walk away, can leave a legacy stronger than any name on a deed. And sometimes the greatest purpose we discover comes not from being needed, but from choosing to belong to one another.